Hello, everybody. Good evening. Vanakkam, Assalamu alaikum, and Aibowan. Welcome to this, the fifth topic and the sixth webinar in our series of AmCham Sri Lanka Knowledge Hub webinars, created and curated especially for you to bring you information, insights, analysis, and in-depth knowledge on topics that are really relevant, important, and immediately impactful to you. We hope you have been following our series and that the topics we focus on, as well as the insights from our eminent panels on those subjects, have helped you in your planning towards business continuity and repurposing in the medium and long term. And in case you've missed any of our previous sessions, they are available via our YouTube channel, AmCham Sri Lanka, where I urge you to watch, like, share, and of course, give us some love by subscribing. Now today, we're taking a deep dive into the new mode of working from home. Working from home is by itself not a new thing. It has been around, but for a minority, and necessarily as a perk rather than a norm. Given, however, the current crisis, the work from home model is becoming a rule rather than the exception, with many organizations opting to adopt for work from home in the short to mid-term at least, and well, maybe longer. Now, it's a well-known fact that employees need not return to working from their cubicles and offices on an indefinite basis is becoming the new mode of work, as it were. And even here in Sri Lanka, many companies, including several conglomerates and blue chips, have moved their administrative and back-end staff who don't need to physically be present at the location of business onto work from home. I was told, in fact, that for one of the larger organizations who employs an average of about 10,000 staff, that this is about 30 to 40% of their workforce that are currently and will remain working from home for the foreseeable future. Now, I'm talking of just one organization there, and in fact, one whose bulk workforce is actually operational, so will continue to come into work. But what happens when we multiply this figure by, well, times the number of organizations that will be implementing work from home in a long-term basis or on a long-term basis in Sri Lanka? This is then a considerable portion of the Sri Lankan workforce that will be doing this for a while to come. Good thing? Well, you might think so, since work from home is viewed as a perk. I mean, sure, you have the flexibility of multitasking. You don't have to waste hours a day commuting. You don't have to dress up. You don't have to be rushed off your feet and sleep deprived, or for that matter, starch-filled. You have more time to spend with loved ones and kids. And yes, I do feel you. I have 3 myself. You have more time to learn soft skills, to exercise, to eat healthy, to appreciate life and nature, etc., etc. You benefit, your family benefits, the environment benefits, even the company benefits probably, because they can downsize on real estate and overhead costs. But is it actually all rosy? Is this a one-sided coin? Well, I for one certainly don't think so. Not when the coin goes from literally being this to this, right? So if work from home is going to become the norm rather than the exception, I think the responsible thing to do would be to take a deep dive into the obvious, not so obvious, probable, possible, economic, social, psychological, and practical impact that it's going to have on employers, employees, and on society. And yes, there are other segments as well, like take, for instance, our families, women, single parents of both sexes, seniors, gig workers, and the differently abled. How does working from home affect each and every one of us, positively and negatively? What are the challenges we face, and how much of a good thing is it going to be? So do get your oxygen tanks on as we take this deep dive. Let me introduce our dive masters for this evening. Our keynote panelist, Ms. Simran Singh, is the Country Director, Sri Lanka and Maldives for the International Labour Organization. Ms. Singh, a US national, has been an ILO staff member since the year 2000, since when she has held various positions in different ILO offices as well as at ILO headquarters in Geneva. Her most recent post at the ILO prior to coming into Sri Lanka in 2017, held between 2008 to 2017, was as Senior Specialist on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work based in the ILO Regional Office for Asia and Pacific, Bangkok. Ms. Singh holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology and sociology from Connecticut College and a master's degree in international development studies from the George Washington University. Simran, thank you for being with us, for taking the time. It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to have you join this panel for us today.
Thank you, Ray. Pleased to be here.
Kulsekara is an Executive Vice President and the Chief People Officer, Head of Sustainability and Enterprise Risk Management of the John Keells Group. With an investment banking background, he joined JKH in 2001 and was involved in some of the group's key mergers, acquisitions, and privatizations at the initial outset. He later led new projects for the transport and logistics sector, where as the first employee of the company, he started John Keells Logistics, the 3PL and supply chain arm of the group, and led it as its chief executive for over 10 years. During the period, he was also CEO of McKinnon's Travels and Transfer Logistics for a short period. And moving back into the group's center, he led the recent HR digital transformation before taking over in his current role. Pre-JKH, Isru was attached to JP Morgan Chase in the USA and in Sri Lanka. A keen sportsman, he played for and captained Sri Lanka Davis Cup tennis in 2003, and he is also an avid wildlife enthusiast and photographer, having published, in fact, his own wildlife photography book titled Sanctuary, to raise awareness of the importance of wildlife and forest conservation in Sri Lanka. Welcome, Isru. It's nice to see you seated at a desk and not out in the wild in that case.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Next up, Dhannath Fernando is a market researcher with extensive experience in commercial research sector in the industries of healthcare, automobile, education, and financial markets. Business strategy development, marketing communications, and civil and freedom rights are his core areas of interests. Currently, he serves as the Chief Operating Officer and Executive Director of Advocata, a liberal think tank based in Colombo. He is also the Honorary Vice President in National Relations for Liberal Youth Guilds of Sri Lanka and a key pillar at Breakthrough Business Intelligence. The Freedom Fair, Freedom Roadshow, and Freedom Calendar are a few of the events Dhannath founded, which was able to get the attention and appreciation among many global think tanks. Dhannath holds a degree from the University of Colombo in the fields of bioscience and is pursuing his postgraduate studies. Dhannath, thank you. This afternoon, I'm sure you have plenty going on, but thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this panel.
Thank you, Rai, for having me.
And AmCham's very own treasurer, Sanjeev Abegunwadana, is a logistics and supply chain specialist with over 2 decades of experience in the fields of ocean shipping, freight forwarding, air cargo, project logistics, express freight, and e-commerce supply chain solutions. An avid proponent and a student of change management driven by passion for people, psychology, leadership, New Zealand All Blacks, and architecture, Sanjeeva's core strengths are in organizational behavior and a focus on continuous improvement techniques in achieving excellence. Sanjeeva currently serves on the Group Management Committee of Haley's Advantage Limited and is the Executive Director of Mountain Hawk Express. He is an Advisory Council member for Logistics at the Export Development Board and the past President of the Sri Lanka Association of Air Express Companies. Hi Sanjeeva, welcome and good evening.
Hi Rai, thanks for having me. Good evening.
Now, of course, your moderator for this evening's session, change management guru and CEO by day, Priyanga Dasanayake. Priyanga, also known as Dasa, is the CEO of Brandix College of Clothing Technology and founder of Dasa Organisation Private Limited, a firm with a focus on unleashing the full potential of individuals and organizations to achieve extraordinary results. He is also a director of several other private companies. In July 2018, Priyanga was recognized as one of Sri Lanka's top training and development leaders by the World HRD Congress. Priyanga has changed the lives of over thousands with his unique facilitation and unpretentious nature. His bilingual fluency in English and Sinhala, cross-industry experience, and ability to relate to a mature as well as millennial generation has gained him wide acceptance across organizational structures, something that I myself too can definitely bear witness to. And of course, his consultancy engagements covers both SME and large corporates. A chartered marketeer by profession, Priyanga holds a postgraduate diploma in marketing from SIM UK and an MBA from BIM. He has obtained his NLP education in Singapore. He is a trained member of the ICF and a licensed practitioner of NLP. He is also a certified executive coach of the John Mattone Global Inc. and a certified facilitator in Lego Serious Play method by the Association of Master Trainers in Lego Serious Play. Prior to founding Dasa organization, Priyanga was a senior sales manager of Sri Lanka and Maldives at Oracle Corporation, head of marketing at Keel Super, and head of operations at Nexus Networks. Priyanga also holds the distinction of being perhaps the first designated change manager in Sri Lanka in 2004 for the John Keells Holdings ERP project spanning over 70 companies. And now, after that impressive list of credentials of our dive masters, I'm almost embarrassed to introduce little old me. Rai Raymond, your host, creator, and facilitator of this series, General Manager and ED of the American Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka. Priyanka, over to you. Priyanka, I think you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. Am I audible now? Okay. Thanks, Rai. Thanks for putting this together. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we've got over 100 participants who have joined with us on Zoom and so many others on various other platforms. So I, together with my fellow panelists, what we're trying to do today is to do exactly what Rai wanted us to do, trying to become the dive masters for this very timely topic. Again, I think Rai talked about it. All the headline news with regards to work from home is about Twitter, is about Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg talking about permanently people working from home. That's all great. And I think I, together with my fellow panelists, are also experiencing these things in our own organizations itself. However, let's look at it from an organization perspective. So when you say work from home, what I've essentially seen for the past 2 months, 2+ X number of days, is we've got, I'll probably categorize these companies, what we see around, into 4 different areas. Number one, we've got a group of companies who are, from a business model perspective, who are geared for this. They had the structure in place, the nature of the business that they did really allowed work from home without any issue. A typical example would be majority of the companies who are dealing in the IT sector, because they were geared for it, working from home. People were quite used to it and they were very comfortable with it. That's the first type. Then we also saw a group of companies or types of companies who could easily pivot their business model to work from home. In fact, in my particular organization, I've got one division that easily did that. We are into training and development, and very easily, when we figured out by about 13th, there might be a 2-week, initially a 2-week thing coming up. We decided very quickly, okay, let's pivot our business model to deliver things online. So online education, I think, is booming significantly. And any of the parents in this forum would agree with me. Our kids have started doing online training and we've been paying those teachers the same amount, probably for the classes, and the business has significantly boomed. And there are benefits on that. So there were businesses like that who could easily pivot. Then the third type were the people who followed business models that was a hybrid, which had a certain amount of people who could possibly work from home, at the same time who had frontline workers and direct staff who had to come to work. So back-end operations, essentially, like Rai said earlier, was easily managed online, but the rest either had to come in batches, in smaller numbers, etc. Then the fourth category is possibly the highly manufacturing intensive organizations who require, I mean, they've got to bring their people in. And I think they were the ones who were hit badly. So their challenges were quite enormous. They were waiting till, the government gave that go ahead to partially start operations. And again, being part of a group that's heavily into manufacturing, I know how challenging it is on daily basis to bring even 30% of your workload or less with all the testing to everything. So while work from home is essentially what we're talking about, I think from organization point of view, this was something that was forced upon organizations, not that any of us had a choice. So some organizations simply reacted to it. Some organizations, they were type of knee-jerk reactions. Others reacted to it, then started responding to it in a better way. So I suppose it's entirely to do with the type of business and the business models as well. But all credit to companies in Sri Lanka and especially the workers in Sri Lanka, because the way that they've taken it up in spite of the challenges. So the second area from an organization point of view was the technology readiness. I think it's quite straightforward for all of us to think. Most of you all must be joining this Zoom call using a mobile phone. But I'd like to hear the views of my panelists as well. It's not so easy to do work from home purely from mobile. You've got to have basic things in place. If you look at the Sri Lankan corporate sector, how many people do have access to laptops. I suppose almost all the people who are part of this call, or majority, going by the typical profiling, I would think that you all have access to laptops at home or some form of mobile device that where you can do work. Whilst majority of the people, simple thing that they could do was joining from the mobile. And that was purely for a call most of the time. So the challenges from a technology background was also another one companies had to consider. The bigger ones definitely had the systems in place, security in place. It was a matter of ramping up. Initial few weeks, it would have been tough. But they sort of brought up the technology to a level where people could work from home. But then again, have we thought through every aspect of it? Because I don't know how many companies have really thought about providing data for people. Getting into calls like this is not easy. It's gonna consume significant amount of data, and then of course the question is who pays for it. I don't know whether we've had open conversations on those, or we take it for granted. Okay, people will manage for the moment because they've got benefits, like we discussed earlier. Given there are benefits to it, to offset that, they'll manage their own data. But have companies really looked at providing these sort of benefits? So overall, what this brought about for companies was forced change. And as always, with change, the journey is never easy. And I think for the last 2 months, in all fairness, in terms of people as well, people are doing their level best to work from home, give their 120%. And majority of the people that I talk to, including myself, we find that we work more working from home. It's not really work less, we actually work more. Sometimes those timelines and boundaries, it's again, we always say, make sure that you have that segregation going in between work and work life and private life. But then again, we seem to be working more, and it's taking that toll on us. Again, for the last 2 months, a lot of people were thankful for the fact that they already had a job to work from home. Given the context that a lot of companies were looking at either cut downs, etc., there is that fierce hypothesis. So we were doing our utmost best to continuously, contribute the best we can. But however, I think the challenge, like what Rai said, for the longer term is to see, this curve is going to sort of flatten at some point. People are going to get used to working from home. And with that, really, how would employees react to it? And how do you think the organization should react to it? Because the current pace within which that we worked for the last 2 months, for those of you who ran that sprint, I don't think that's going to work. I think we've got to get into far more disciplined method of working from home, because as a country, maybe certain sectors were always used to it. IT, for instance, would have been used to it to work on certain deliveries, etc. But I think other sectors need to get used to that. So that's one aspect I'd like to focus on. Second thing is, and my fellow panelists will also talk about this, is the psychosocial impact. Because work from home all of a sudden was great. No doubt about it. We had more time to spend with our families. We also had more time to work with our kids. But also what the research shows is that having kids at home is not easy. It's never easy, right? They might be also doing online schooling, but still for all, depending on the ages of your children, because they demand your time. Because when you are at home, whatever said, or rather when you are at work, you were able to focus at that time 100% on work. But now your kids come and tell you, right? In my case, Tati, do this, do that, do the other. I mean, it's natural that they demand more from you. It's easy for me to say, look, sorry, I'm working. This is my work time. Don't disturb me. It's easier said than done, but you really can't expect your child, because the child also is experiencing 2 months of lockdown. And they don't have socializing. The only people that they have to socialize is whoever who's at home. And that includes you and me. So that's another interesting perspective on that, because we are really talking about work-life balance. We feel working from home allows us to manage that better. But I think a lot of people are also struggling to manage it. And I fully empathize with my female colleagues as well, because sometimes their role as, let's say, a mother and a workwoman is, there's an added, definitely thing to that. So that's another area that I think we need to be a lot more conscious because as organizations, the time that we demand from people, my experience has been, because we've been on a firefighting mode for the first 2 months, some of the industries that we're involved in, we've really worked our butts out. Pardon me for using that word. We've really worked ourselves, but I think now it has come to a point after 2 months with the realization that this is for the longer term, foreseeable future. I think we need to put far more structure in place to get it done that way. And the last area what I'd like to focus on is to open up the conversation to everyone. That is on the performance side of things. So interestingly, majority of the companies here would have gone into the lockdown and work from home from mid-March. Then interestingly, majority of the companies are also having their end of financial year on 31st. And this is the time usually, I know for a fact, for ISRO, it's most probably July. For majority of the companies, this is the time we work on our performance evaluations and then really looking at things. So new goal setting to everything, we've looked at it that way. So it's agreed that we need to look at things not from a effort point of view, but from a impact point of view. So therefore, really there are ways and means. I'm sure my fellow panelists will talk about it. For the longest possible time, at least, maybe not at an organization level, but at an individual level, a lot of bosses were very conscious about the effort people put in. They were worried about the effort and they were valuing people for their effort. But I think all of a sudden we've come to a stage where really the outcome is more important than the effort. So another factor we need to consider is on the, not the psychological aspect of it, but also on the physiological aspect of it. Because working from home was forced upon us. And as we all know, how many of us actually have, ergonomic chairs or whatever to sit down and do work for the longest possible time. Usually the office setups are structured in such a way to support these things. But at home, all of a sudden, I find a lot of people, they take a dining room chair, which is not geared to supporting you for 8 hours to sit down and work. And apparently in countries like India and so many other places, I don't have the stats for Sri Lanka, we find that a lot of people are complaining about increased neck pains and back pains and stuff like that. So overall, this is what we see. And what I'd like to do is, before I move on to my panelists, Rai, could we run a simple poll to understand the pulse of the people who are part of this Zoom call? Could we run that, Rai?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm just about to share this via screen sharer. You will find at the top of the screen that it gives you the link to which you need to, I think, log into www.menti.com. And there is a code number that you need to enter, and you'll find it now at the top of the screen. And when you just start off by, I'll give you maybe a minute to go ahead and, there you go. Let me give you the code and the voting instructions. There you go. So if you either go to menti.com or use the QR code, and that gets you onto the system, and then you enter this PIN number, which is 115481, and then we can get to the questions. So Priyanka, maybe let's take 30 seconds for everyone to get online. So I'll hand over back to you till then.
Thank you. So please log into menti.com, www.menti.com, menti.com. And simply just like Google, there's a space to enter that number, 115481. And if you could do that, we could get some feedback from you, which will set the context for my fellow panelists to sort of structure their conversation based on your feedback as well. So open up another tab and go to www.menti.com. Well, already we are getting the answers as I speak. So the question was, wow, since mid-March, how many of you have been working from home? So majority is 3 to 5 days, but interestingly, 41% as at now, 39% based on the feedback, it's all 7 days. So I think the sample size, Rai, any idea about the sample size? I think even the Facebook audiences might be doing this, so it could be more than 100.
Currently, we have a little over 120 responding right now.
So there you go. So we'll spend another 20 seconds on this question, and possibly we'll move on to the next one after that. Great, thank you very much. So majority of you, so there you go. Almost, so good crowd is actually working all 7 days of the week. So this is our second question. Appreciate your answers to this as well. Good 47%, it's more than 8 hours. Wow. And over 15%, we're seeing, okay, the numbers are slightly changing, but there is a significant number that puts in more than 12 hours a day. Right. I think possibly we can move on to the next one. Right. Thank you. So just to sort of re-emphasize, work from home doesn't mean essentially it's always calls and, okay, for some of you, over 80% it's calls and videos, all right. Okay. So for good 50%, your time spent work from home involves video and audio meetings, which is quite time consuming, rather effort consuming as well. There's a great effort that's required. There you go. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next question, right? Interesting. Okay. The code is 115481. 115481. It's on top of the screen. All right. Rai, any more questions? Okay. 84% believes that the new norm as employees should be set in. 84% of this audience essentially believes the new norm should be set in. Either absolute yes or with certain modifications, but work from home is, as far as you all are concerned, is here to stay. Very interesting. It has gone up to 86%. Right. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for actively responding to these questions. So, with that insight, which is captured right now, Rai, sample group would have been about 100 plus, right? In general, yeah. Thank you. So, with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite Simran. Simran, in your capacity, as what you do, could you just elaborate how organizations in general are taking this on, the global perspective on that? We pretty much have seen the local perspective, but the global perspective on that. But at the same time, I would like you to touch on both the psychosocial angle of this, what you've seen so far, as well as specifically how this has an impact on women, single parents, like Rai at the beginning said, both the genders, as well as the differently abled. That's another area we'd like to hear from you. Simran, forum is all yours.
Thanks very much, and I'll try to do justice in a few minutes to some of these issues. Let me just start off by saying that working from home is nothing new. I know we've taken a deep dive all of a sudden because of the health crisis, but people have been home-based workers for quite a while. And I think this is a dimension that's not looked at. When we look at teleworking now, we're thinking of a corporate sort of atmosphere, or maybe not looking at it from the different sectors actually at play where people have been actually working. They have been home-based beauty workers, for example, in India, home-based garment producers, stitchers, etc. Also freelance workers, they've all been home-based. So in fact, actually before COVID, we're talking about already 8% of the global work population were home-based workers and were already teleworking, of which only 3% were exclusively teleworking. Now, obviously, the global COVID crisis has, for health reasons, and rightfully so, really thrown this and accelerated it quite significantly. And it's come with, I'm glad to see that people are taking it, embracing teleworking fairly positively. Would like to see that this continues. And fair enough. You have seen productivity gains and adaptability of certain sectors, like you mentioned, the IT sector, that were already equipped to deal with this change. And then you've seen other sectors that have not done so well. And I would say, for example, the micro, small, medium enterprise sector. They have really hurt because they have a smaller number of employees. They don't have the same level of working capital. They probably haven't had the same access to the technology. I think even your people here in this audience would say that it was not quite easy connecting to your hundreds of Zoom meetings because everyone was using broadband and everything was just sort of coming together, while you were following social media and trying to keep up with all the news. And it was quite a maddening situation. It really brought to light some very important dimension here, which is that the digital dimension is essential for this teleworking to work. We found out, it was interesting, I found out that even countries like Japan, you would think would be quite advanced digitally, actually had not proceeded in terms of getting some of the paperwork done, for businesses, etc., where you actually still needed a physical stamp on things. It hadn't been digitized enough so that when things were in lockdown and you were not able to go about business as the usual, that side of the economy really started to suffer because of the lack of ability to deal with payments. So I think this idea of digitizing and having the right kind of broadband access couldn't be more essential for all industries and all sectors, including those micro and small enterprises, because they need access to markets, right? They need to be able to figure out how mobile banking mobile payments can take place. What we saw here in Sri Lanka, when the whole food distribution thing was being figured out, how are we starting to get food in that immediate period, especially in cities with hotspots, like Colombo? It was these WhatsApp groups and other groups and local entrepreneurs that were able to get market and bring food and supply it to different neighborhoods and things like that. So we already sort of saw opportunities emerging for people that were freelancers or were maybe struggling to access and market their products, but that could actually do so more effectively because you could actually effectively do more digital payments and banking. And so I think that's an aspect that I feel a little bit better, although not everyone in Sri Lanka has access, but the potential for that to grow is really, really huge for teleworking to be a win-win. And I just want to go back to the issue of and this links also to psychosocial and also specifically more not so well-off workers out there, it's this issue of housing, because that becomes your workplace. And for many of them, if you're a small, medium enterprise or micro, your workplace has already been your home. And all of a sudden, your home, where other workers might come, 5, 10, or however many, becomes this place that could be the vector of reinfection. So you have all of those different dimensions. Many of these small places might be owned by women that don't have any access to banking, right? So they started their businesses before from a loan shark or someone in the neighborhood that gave them some money, whatever. Informal channels of loans to be able. Now they don't even have access to that, so they're in and out. So there's a huge dimension. We've also heard about a lot of domestic violence cases going up in this lockdown, right? Again, women particularly have been affected. So the hotlines are there. Please call, we can support you. But there's a recognition that with home-based and this teleworking arrangements, the cases of violence, especially violence against women, even violence against children for that matter, have gone up. And yeah, fine. You put in place alcohol ban and maybe that helped, I don't know. But the fact is that it is something that was of concern that happened when you are in places. And so if you're especially in these small congested places, so you're not part of the top echelons of good companies that are still paying you well and you have, great internet access, you could do as you please, you can play tennis in your backyard if you wish. If you don't have all of that, it actually becomes quite a difficult place because you might not have all the safety and health requirements that you would perhaps find in an office setting or in a manufacturing setting that you all of a sudden have to start doing from home. So that puts a specific burden. Yes, ergonomics, spending endless hours on Zoom meetings, etc., sitting there, not moving around. The ergonomic challenges are quite huge. I think the other challenge is that the lack of clarity we found between employers and employees about what the expectations are. And this links to the issue of results and how do you measure people's results and delivery at the end. It's quite difficult remotely trying to figure out what are your expectations, what you're going to produce, by what time, because your patterns are completely also different in the way you operate. So I think this understanding between managers and workers is essential because that creates, even though you're connected through technology, you're actually super disconnected. And this is something I wanted to add, the psychosocial dimension. I found also in my own case, for example, on lockdown, we're working now, we're down to the 20% formula back at the office. But it made a huge difference in terms of productivity and efficiency coming back, even if it was a small number, because the face-to-face dynamic was so essential in terms of creative ideas, for responding to situations or whatever had to be done in a very exaggerated manner. And it was very difficult disjointedly to have individual conversations with different people on using technologies. You have different time zones all of a sudden merging together. It was exhausting, and it still is exhausting, but it's more manageable. And there's really a premium, and this is even pre-COVID that we found, in terms of the human element of interaction. I see that most people said in that survey, okay, you need a bit of with modification, I'd like this to go forward. And I think the modification is a bit more being flexible, not being stuck and completely imprisoned, in one place. I think that makes a huge, huge difference because it is important for many people to have the routine, to have the ability to be able to meet and interact. And it depends again on the sectors and the nature of the job. You have, for example, in the manufacturing sector here, you are working in the garments, even in the BOI zones, you have fewer employees, you're trying to repurpose some industries with the PPE, production, etc. Great, you can do that, but you don't maybe need, and you can't maybe afford because of health concerns to have everyone come back at the same time. So can they be manufacturing if they're migrant workers from, I don't know, 3 districts away or however, a different province? They can't be sitting there manufacturing, be working part of your supply chain. So they're in effect out of work. And is that a good thing for them or not? Probably not, because they're not getting paid, or you have come to agreements, which I'm very happy here, in terms of paying workers that are supposedly unable to report to work. But at the same time, it is not a long-lasting solution because it's quite expensive. So there's a lot to think about when it comes to the teleworking thing. And again, the issue of women. One of the things that even prior to COVID we were looking at is like, oh yeah, technology and it'll open up doorways. Teleworking will allow women to have a better work-life balance. And actually we always cautioned on that, because what we found was that, and especially I would say perhaps in South Asian and other societies that are more patriarchal or in some ways traditional, is that she would be working from home in the hours required, the 8 or however many. We could see people working 12 hours, right? And then at the same time, she'd have the additional burden of childcare and elderly care. So, I've had friends and colleagues that are sitting there right now, females that have the elders that have come back from hospital that need to be taken care of, and grandparents and children that aren't going to school, and the demands of work, and it's exhausting. And not the outlet to be able to go out and actually be as efficient perhaps with co-workers if you're physically meeting each other and then working in teams, etc. So I think these are dimensions that one has to look at. I think for people with disabilities, the whole thing also we talked about is their inclusion. How can they get into the world of work? How can we break down the barriers? And this is in a way forcing them even more isolation. And because the whole idea is they already lived many ways isolated lives. So yes, it provides opportunities. You can harness technology. It's not very different in many ways if you are on the technology side. But in terms of really being part of society, the world of work is now, in a way, shut down even further. So they might be able to adapt, but that issue of their inclusion is something that had been pushed and now is going to be much more difficult going forward. So housing also is something really we must look at. I cover Sri Lanka, Maldives as well, and one of the big challenges, very congested areas. Where do the workers live? I mean, many of them are living in dorms and boarding houses, extremely congested areas. And it's like disease vector, right? It's spreading all sorts of, it's quite risky in a COVID situation, health crisis situation. So apart from the ergonomics and maybe overcrowded houses, think of people that are actually having to work and live in dorms and then, really shared housing. And that's not conducive whatsoever in a health situation, much less in a productivity situation to the scenarios of teleworking. I think all of these things really need to be looked at quite carefully from an employee's but also an employer's perspective, because basically you don't want to be opening up too soon, bringing in workers and exposing them, or being your workplace not having well workers. But then you also don't want unwell workers back at home because they're living in uncrowded housing. You don't want unproductive or less productive workers working from home because broadband access isn't even or isn't great. So they really can't actually even if they wanted to try to work with technology. And if payments and money flows can't happen, the capital flows aren't happening because it's not digitized, that makes life quite complicated for the teleworking formula going forward. And then, of course, for Sri Lanka, initially it was the food distribution side, but I think that's kind of under control for the time being. So I'll stop right there.
Thanks, Imran. I totally empathize with the fact that, I heard the same thing a couple of weeks ago. Quite a few people said we're totally connected, but we're also disconnected because it's those little chit-chats that we used to have at office that made office what it was. Now we're fully engaged in conversations, but the moment we are out away from the conversation, we are totally switched off. So that's a very interesting perspective. Before getting on to Isuru, just to pick up something that you mentioned, from a housing perspective and so many other things you talked about, Maldives and certain pockets areas, is there a conversation at an organizational level from the organization that you represent that you all drive in terms of getting the employers to consciously deal with this? Because I know individual organizations are looking at it, but is there a conversation that you are driving overall from employers' perspective to look at that from a holistic perspective? Just a quick answer on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, if you're looking at it from a work, it can't be work from home because many of these categories of workers that are living in congested, they were manufacturing workers, they were migrant workers that were working in the hotel sector, or tourism, that stuff's not happening, right? So right now it's still from a health perspective, trying to contain and try to create better places where they can live if they're in a situation not within their own home. But certainly providing advice on home-based work checklists as well in terms of safety and health and physical distancing. The focus so far has really been on the health angle, which is quite important because the health angle relates to the productivity angle. If you're not healthy, you're not productive. And so simple measures in which improvements can be made. So right now, of course, ILO here is working with our employers constituent as well as government, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, et cetera, trying to look at return to work scenarios, and return to work scenarios being both at home as well as back in enterprises of some sort. And the sectors are so different, what it means to return to a restaurant today versus at the beauty salon, if you're in that sort of the care services sector. It's a very different ballgame. Offices seem almost too easy in a way to try to fit for people coming back or to adjust to people staying away. I think the other dimension really is the transport side because of the distances. I mean, I would say 30-40% of my office is not even based in Colombo. So, so they're teleworking from other parts of the island. But I think a lot of other offices also find this workplaces that the workers are working quite far and it's difficult to sort of manage the commute. And you definitely don't want to encourage a commute when the public transport system could also be a vector. So these are the different dimensions of the return to work scenarios, whether at home or whether at office or whether at a manufacturing plant or wherever you might or field that one has to factor in. And we are working closely with the authorities to try to get the right messaging and precautions underway.
Thanks, Simran. Appreciate that a lot. So from Simran, I'd like to move on to Isuru. Isuru, you wear multiple hats at John Keel's, and one hat that you wear is the Chief People's Officer. So for the entire group, you're the main people's man. So from an organization perspective, obviously you had a diversified conglomerate. So what are those opportunities and threats that you see from an organization perspective in terms of working from home? All pomp and pageantry is fine, but from an employer perspective, at the same time, just to touch on how do you really look at performance-based evaluation going forward? If you could touch on that, Isuru.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to American Chamber for inviting me. It's a pleasure to connect. Like we've spoken, I think Priyanka, Simran, Rai all touched on it. Working from home is not new. It's been around forever. And it has been a sort of an agenda item on all our businesses for a long time. But we didn't prioritize it, maybe due to the uncertainty of how effective it might be as a permanent solution. Also, it was not really a pressing issue. Now we've all been pushed into it, and due to sheer necessity, we've had no choice but to make it work. And since we realized that we can in the short run, we are trying to sort of making it a permanent solution. But businesses need to be mindful and not go overboard, right? Yes, we are working remotely, but it is not business as usual for many organizations. Many businesses are depressed. Workload is not evenly distributed. We have some roles working overtime, whilst others have no work. So there has to be a very systematic approach to this and a very careful one. And each role in the organization needs to be examined carefully. And we can't look at the role by itself. It has to be in light of how they connect with other roles. For example, what part does the social interaction of this role play in the efficacy of another role. So it's really a combined output of the ecosystem of interconnected roles and not really by the role itself. So, we have to get away from this notion of saying, look, this role can be performed remotely, and therefore let's move forward with it. It's a lot more complicated than that, and hopefully businesses will also see that. On the positive side, we all spoke about it, the opening up of different talent pools, the sort of technical opportunities of saving on space. All those things are there and they will play a part of it. But we need to be making very sure that we also are aware of the pitfalls. We have discussions on productivity. I'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about empowerment, right? Generally speaking, people will say remote working will work better for employers who are able to empower their employees to a great extent, manage their responsibilities with minimum supervision. But are we really ready to do that as employers? Have we really tested that hypothesis, and to what extent? And this again goes hand in hand with performance management, which again is a different topic. There's a difficult one to sort of look at is the possible erosion of corporate culture. Now, all our businesses over the years have developed cultures that we have come to recognize and pride ourselves in. And of course, this is driven by its people, the ways of working, the way we interact, the type of people that we attract, all drives this culture. Now, erosion doesn't mean that it ceases to exist. It just means that it may erode the current culture, but develop a new one. And then what that might look like, we will have to see. And for some employees who are already in the organization, the culture of the organization has a lot to do with their personal motivation in continuing to be a part of that company. And for that organization, it is an intrinsic means of retention, right? So these are some of the dangerous areas we need to look at. And then look at the future. There's a challenge that potential employees, especially millennials and Gen Zs, are attracted to companies that resonate with their sense of values and culture. How would that impact companies' future recruitment is a challenge. Are we going to attract the right kind of people who will resonate with the culture that we pride ourselves with and we have built for decades or centuries? How is that going to get impacted? Another point that I'd like to touch on from an organization perspective, which is personally very important to me, is that I hope businesses have woken up to the impact that we have on the environment, right? We have all seen the pictures floating around of, clear pictures of Siripada from Colombo and vice versa, leopards on main roads in Aurelia. And this just goes to show how this pandemic, whilst it has had disastrous consequences on human life, has given the chance for Earth to recuperate and heal a little bit, right? So hopefully when we come out of this and we have witnessed firsthand the positive impact that we have on the environment, businesses will be a little bit more careful in their practices, in their things that impact the environment, and have better practices in place, going forward. On the meritocracy and the performance management side of it, I think over the last maybe 2 decades or so, businesses have got a lot better at setting measurable goals and objectives. Now, this approach of having what we call the SMART goals, etc., will become non-negotiable in a remote working environment. And in some form or manner, we need to be able to measure our delivery, and we have to be able to do it without marking attendance. So firstly, it's important to start with the trial period. Let's not give up that personal space in office just yet, right? During the first year, you need to have a structured engagement program, weekly check-ins, once a week, one-on-one, FaceTime, and continuous feedback. So working remotely doesn't mean letting somebody disappear for weeks on end, right? So we need to strike a very careful balance between the flexibility and structure. We need to trust our team, empower them, not micromanage. And we also need to invest in the right kind of technology to continuously assess, their delivery. And it's also very important to understand that while some roles may be ideal for working remotely, it may not suit every employee. So whilst you may have the job ideal for off-site work, you may have an unsuitable employee in that position, one who needs to be in office to perform at their best. So this is because all employees are not cut out for remote working, and this can be simply because they are not self-motivated or could maintain discipline in their homes, or it could be that their home front is not conducive. And this is where we get into the entirely different topic of the psychological impacts of working from home, the home pressures, which Simrin very articulately touched on. So that marriage between the right role and the right employee is absolutely critical. We also need to be very cautious about how productive we are. There's a lot of talk about the increase in productivity. And it is true that we are able to finish what we do in 8 hours in office in 6 hours at home. But why is that? That's because now we have removed the lunchroom chatter. We have removed meeting friends in the corridor and having chats. Walks from meeting room to meeting room has been reduced or removed. And keep in mind, all these things are so important. It gives your mind a rest. So there is a cost of productivity if it's not managed, and that is called burnout, right? So very soon, I'm sure we'll have training sessions on how to be less productive in the short run, but have more stamina for the long haul. We can't sustain this. I would even argue that work-life balance has been compromised by working from home. When possibly the very reason you actually opted to work from home is to have more of it. So whilst we have more discipline to make sure that we do our work from home, we also need to be disciplined to make sure that we have time for life, right? And as employers, we need to also take responsibility to ensure that it happens. We need to take interest in our employees. We need to ask the right questions. We need to make sure their home front is conducive. We need to be a part of that journey. So to answer that question, businesses are more ready than ever before, definitely. But don't rush into it and turn everything into a remote job. Have an end goal, but tread carefully. Fine-tune the kinks and make sure that that we are successful in the long run, then find that we flop immediately upon implementation. So I think we need to sort of, take a step back, not get too excited that 2.5 months of crisis management suddenly means that we are experts at working from home. We are not. This is a different mode. The long-term mode is going to be very different from crisis resolution, hostage mode, right? So yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Isaru, for beautifully setting the context on that. And I think the sentiments are quite obvious, right? The numbers that we saw a little earlier, we found almost half the people saying that we really want to work from home. But like what you said, for the longer term, this is because we are forced to stay at home and do this, right? But when people start coming in, when people start reporting to work, some of you who are currently remotely managing things might be forced to go back as well because you need to manage them. So a very interesting perspective. I don't want to force you to give me a number on it, but essentially, I think like what you said, we are still on the crisis mode. We're simply reacting to something. How long do you reckon in Sri Lanka, the corporate sector, the organized corporate sector will start looking at this in a serious way? Are we looking at a 3 to 6 months timeline for people to understand person and the job fit in terms of remote working and how to balance it, put the checks and balances in place? Because some sectors already have that, right? IT and all that, to a great extent, they have that. What are your thoughts on that, Isru?
Yeah, so Priyank, I think most organizations, or almost all of them, have definitely realized that this is a right situation to take initiative and try to make this work. And I think that's the right direction to take, because if there was ever an opportunity, it is now, right? But having said that, I will give a perspective of how John Case is also looking at it, is that we've, coming out of this, we've turned our flexi-hour policy to an agile work arrangement policy, and we are in the process of really evaluating how this might work. And we are trying to pilot some sectors to see how this will work in the long run. So we don't want to rush and say, look, we are going to turn all these jobs. We will pilot the sector. We will see what sort of impact it has, what roles. And we are following a series of steps to evaluate whether that job is a right job to do that with, and if the person sitting there is a right person to do that with. So it's not an overnight action. It is going to take some time, but it is going to happen. And I think we need to be ready for it. I think a lot of the support functions, the back office functions. So we have different, we have occasional and substantial. Occasional would be, where you go to work maybe 3 days a week, but stay back 2. Substantial will be the other way around. So there will be these different categories of roles that we will identify. And in the long run, once we've established that this is the way that it's going to work, then we'll start looking at if this can benefit the organization in terms of space saving, et cetera, et cetera. But it is not the first thing that we are going to look at. Is the organizational benefit? It's really the right structure and formula for the business to operate at higher optimum levels. If you are doing this purely to translate what we are doing now to another platform, it's not worth the effort.
Okay.
It has to be something incrementally better. So I think we need to look at it through those lenses.
Thank you. Again, it's a popular belief because everybody talks about the cost savings, the benefits to the companies. That's quite obvious. But like Isuru clearly laid out there, it's not a straightforward equation which we have figured out. There's a lot more work to be done before we come to a stage trying to understand what's that exact fit prior to jumping into that bandwagon. So with that, I'd like to move on to Sanjeeva. So Sanjeeva, if you could really share your perspective in terms of overall how organizations are looking at working from home. At the same time, the perspective in terms of how this is having an impact on different groups such as females, single parents. If you could touch upon gig workers, that'll be great because there's a lot of there's a lot of conversations around gig economy in Sri Lanka for the last 8 to 10 months. There's significant discussion that has propped up, at least in the urban sector. So in and around those, if you could share your ideas, Sanjeev?
Yeah. All right. So listening to all the panelists so far, I think they've covered most of the answers that you asked for. But let me share an intriguing thought, a quote that I strongly believe in, and it's so valid right now. This is by Charles Darwin. And the quote goes as, "It is not the strongest nor the most intelligent species that survive, but the most responsive to change." And I think this is very pertinent at this moment. It's all about how we adapt and reinvent ourselves. So personally for me, I think I've put the past behind, personally and professionally. I think looking forward, looking ahead in terms of what can be done in the short term, even at a professional capacity is what we are looking at in the short term in driving our goals. Let me just first start on what is remote working or working from home, and how did this resonate in terms of embracing in a work culture. So the more I reflect on it, it evolved based on improving productivity. And in Sri Lanka, I like to just focus a little bit about the mindset of this in our corporate cultures, in organizations. We tend to think whether it really matters. Is it something that came from the West? Is it something that appeals to the millennials that we're trying to force on the other generations? And does it really improve productivity? And these are some of the things, or is it just a feel-good statement that we want to say, no, we also adopted working from home, or we have a remote working policy. So the more you deep dive and try and understand, it's about productivity. It's about how do you get the better of somebody and to give better output by giving flexibility, autonomy, life balance in doing their job, role, or function properly. But it doesn't necessarily appeal to everybody in the organization. I come from a logistics background, and definitely 70% of our work is operational. So it may not really appeal to all of us, but there is a portion of work, some segment of the work that can be applied to work remotely, and that also has a lot of benefits in terms of benefits which I think Isuru also highlighted in its opportunities for a corporate or a company organization. Last year, I think AmCham also carried an advocacy series on productivity. This is a knowledge sharing session, and the topic actually covered productivity. And we had themes like the gig workforce, flexi working hours, engaging the female workforce, who in my view, need a lot of flexibility and equal opportunity to thrive and prosper. We don't have the right legislation and the means in our work environment to offer these flexible working hours to especially the female workforce, the single mothers, the differently abled. And these are all possibilities that we can explore if we can strike the right balance. I think what COVID-19 did to us was give us, it just exploded and took the momentum to an extreme. And I think what we need to do is to see whether we can strike the right balance. Interestingly, I know we had some polls during the session. I also had a colleague of mine who actually had a sample group and ran a survey based on the feedback on working from home. This is about roughly 4 to 5 weeks after the lockdowns happened. And surprisingly, 65% of the sample group responded saying that it has been actually, that has a positive impact towards for employees to work from home. I'll just share with you some of those interesting data points that were shared. So 32% of the respondents said that working from home was productive, and this was represented largely by millennials. 40% millennials and 50% female respondents confirmed that working from home was far more productive. 53% of the respondents and 60% of millennials also acknowledged that they were able to maintain a healthy work-life balance. 67% of the working women preferred working from home, while only 36 men preferred to work from home. So that's very interesting. So based on the question you asked me, I think that is a good representation of why sometimes work from home policies might be conducive and will help get the best out of our workforce, be it a corporate or for Sri Lanka, as in totality. However, 23 to 28% were very skeptical of the fact that once everything is back to normal, that the physical distancing is removed, that some organizations or most organizations would get back to the old system of removing flexi hours and working from home. So in my view, it's all about flexi hours. So we ran this series also to drive productivity, on the theme of productivity. These are some of the interesting points that came about. So in terms of opportunities, I think we spoke about for the workforce that you mentioned. See, all of this requires a lot of travel time. I think we've covered this through. As much as there is a lot of opportunities, we also have a few threats in terms of security on data protection. There is also in Sri Lanka a lack of oversight might be required. And we may also have to learn to give up certain amount of control in the way we manage organizations when we adapt to working from home. I think Isru also touched on, so do we have the right metrics in place? Does the organization have a more fact-based, more scientific approach towards measuring performance? Well, if there are organizations which, in my view, have got this right, they have a future ready, but there are also organizations that still largely depend on relationship-based performance merits. And if we can work towards just giving up on control, I think Sri Lanka, quietly skews more towards being in organizations where we try to control a lot of things. And if we can figure out a way and share these learnings for organizations to move away towards measuring only the output, I think a lot of challenges in terms of adapting to these work from home policies at the right balance might work out. Again, just touching on some of these policies, it's also an opportune moment to repurpose our organizations, our teams, and individual goals in times of a situation like this. The economy has contracted. We have many challenges where I think many are privy that yes, we may not have enough work as we used to have, but it's all about repurposing ourselves. There was a very inspiring story I think I came across where there was a company that manufactures pizza, which repurposed their entire staff to make shields converted their business to providing PPE equipment. So these are some fascinating stories about how organizations have repurposed themselves. Not everyone has the opportunity to do it, but I think it's all about how the leadership teams, how people come together and figure out how you repurpose your organizations. Another interesting point is to revisit how what short-term goals are going to be like. What do you do and why do you do things? Define what good looks like in our new normal scenarios. What goals would your teams be excited about? Are some of the areas that we probably need to redefine. A few of the organizations, like I said, and I think Isuru also touched on it, spoke about meritocracy. As long as you can engage some of those segments of the workforce, especially the female workforce, the differently abled, it's all about how we set those boundaries in meeting some of those outputs that we require and how we measure them. So whilst we all have measurements, processes in place, it's about trying to find that right balance. It's always good to have processes, have a performance-based culture, but the human relationship is very, very important. And in times like this, when you, be it COVID or not, once we get back to work, and if we have to work remotely or work from home, we also have to be mindful about how we show empathy towards some of these employees. Transparency is key. So if you have the right reward and recognition tools in place which are aligned to your performance metrics in your organization and the teams, then it's all about transparency and also being connected. So again, my take is it's important, but I think we need to find the right balance in all of this when we get back to work. And I think remote working is here to stay. It does definitely redefine organizations, and it will help leverage and leapfrog to be more productive. Like I said, not in all functions, but in the functions that actually can be productive. It has a lot of aspects that gives a lot of benefits and opportunities to employees and to employees and the employer. So what we need is managers who define, we need not managers who define what good looks like, but leaders who define what great looks like. It will be tempting to lower your standards for the team when we are faced with adversity. But it's important to reject those temptations and to reinvent and repurpose yourself and your organizations to meet the future demands and be ready with the lessons that we've learned through the impact of this pandemic. Yeah. I think you're on mute.
Thanks, Sanjeev. Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate that. Quite a broad perspective on that. So before I move on to Dhananath, there's a question on Q&A from Giridhar Radhakrishnan. If any of you can pick up this question, if you know the answer to this. So the question is, any estimate what percentage age of Sri Lanka's working population is competent to work unsupervised and committed to results rather than effort? Interesting question. Any of you would like to pick that on? Has there been any kind of studies done? Simran, any conversations around that? It's on the Q&A, the question.
No, it's a deep question, and of course there's no statistics, but I think the question already implies an answer, which is, unfortunately, there were issues already with the kind of education system, the kind of graduates coming out and entering the labor market that were not as well prepared for this agility that's needed, the adaptability that's needed, the creativity that's needed, just the kind of things that would be needed in this new way of working. So I think while people were quite academically excellent, a lot of the education system was gearing people for the public service, right? And even the public services, we know, it took weeks, right, to adapt to a work from home type of modality. before they set up the IT systems and everything for government officers to even provide the basic services, including issuance of visas or whatever it might be, as simple as that. So I think it really has brought to bear that a lot of, unfortunately, the system itself hasn't educationally churned out the kind of graduates and that haven't had this ability to be adaptable. But this has been a great wake-up call in a sense. I mean, I will see the silver lining. I mean, I can already see in conversations with the skills ministry, with online learning and, even TV-based vocational training, etc. I think this is really a welcome, in a sad way, but a welcome moment to really reshape and rethink how this is delivered so that we are ready to be agile, ready to be adaptable. Honestly, people change careers currently before COVID 7 times in a lifetime, and that requires a different kind of a worker, right? Now it's going to be probably even higher because precisely we're talking about repurposing. What it takes a certain kind of skill set or makeup, a certain kind of DNA in a kind of employee and their manager or their leader to be able to see that repurposing through and to make the most out of it and to be able to adapt to that repurposing. So I think it's a loaded question. There's no straightforward statistical answer per se, but I think generally the trend has not been that positive for Sri Lanka prior to COVID, but we have an opportunity now. I think we should really look at what is needed going forward because this crisis has been unlike any other crisis, and who knows what the next crisis is going to look like. So this is definitely a wake-up call that we do need to change the way we operate and behave and nurture our employees.
Thank you. Thank you, Simran. Isru, would you like to add anything to that? Not in terms of percentages, but possibly any thoughts around it wearing your CPO hat?
Priyanka, percentages would be a tough one, but in terms of what sort of workforce would merit, would look at effort versus sort of quantitative output.
They are ready for it. Yeah, how many of them exactly?
Yeah, I think if you look at the younger generation, the new workforce, the millennials and the Gen Zs, are really looking at more from an interaction perspective and experiences rather than positions and titles, etc. And along with that will come the expectation that they will be in a social environment where they can really contribute and interact with each other. For their efforts to be recognized, because you will constantly find every week millennials and Gen Zs will be sitting in front of you asking how they are doing and whether there's anything they can do. And this is the sort of interaction they expect. So, and the way they would like to show the effort is also with that sort of interaction. So I would hazard a guess to say that, for example, at JKH, about 60% of our workforce is under 30, 32, 33. I would reckon that a majority of them would expect that effort to be recognized way of one-on-one interactions and not from a remote location. So I think we need to keep that in mind because the workforce is a bit younger for some organizations, of course, and their expectations might be different. So.
Thanks a lot, Isru, for that feedback. Okay, Dhananath, so let's move on to you. So we've talked a lot about in terms of how this is going to have an impact in terms of organizations and the challenges we have. But what I'd like to do is, again, I'd like to get the bigger picture from you. How is this having this whole work from home? I believe there would have been a reason why the government went on major media and said it's a curfew, but you need to work from home. When a government does that, there are reasons for it. So how is work from home last 2 months, 64 or whatever the number of days, what sort of impact is it having on the Sri Lankan economy? Our little 88 or $85 billion economy, what sort of impact is it having on the work from home, and what are your thought processes for the future from a macro perspective?
Thanks, Priyanka, and thank you very much for having me. Just giving the broader picture, as we all know, we are somewhat in an economic perspective, we are heading to a recession, and which has been discussed, and that's the sad story, and the entire world is pretty much moving towards a recession. So the impact for the employers and the employees would be, there will be a big drop in their businesses. And as you already know, even people who are working at home, they have some big companies had to announce like salary cuts of 30%, 50%. So the context is when you are working at home, in terms of impact, in terms of our workforce of 8 million, 60% are informal. Those are informal people, and about 1 million to 1.2 million is government sector workers. So in terms of the government sector workers, of that 1 million to 1.3 million, I would say their productivity would be very low compared to the other sectors, because of course not that all the government employees are equipped to work from home. And if you look at their card sector, it's more like that the PN level or at like very worker level rather than a decision making level sitting in front of a computer. So that about 1 million to 1.3 million is very low productive. It is not undermining the good work that they are doing. Their health sectors and other sectors are doing a wonderful job, military and everyone. So however, at an overall level, there's a big drop there. And in terms of in the government sector, the teaching, I think that is picking up. I'm sure the parents who are in this conversation now, the schools have moved on to online teaching, and now I think it's picking up. The online learning platforms are taking place. So that is somewhat getting productive. In terms of overall private sector, I would say it's again about 30 to 40% productivity is my estimation. I'm just telling from my gut feel. I don't based on any research. So that's my estimation on that front, Priyanka. But the important thing is we all are passing through a hard time, because it's not only me or you or one person from a household working from home. It's also your wife is also working from home, and your kid is also there, and maybe you both have to like sit for a meeting at the same time. And the kid is also demanding, as you said, a lot of attention. And at the same time, sometimes now the schools have also moved to online learning platforms. So you have to prepare the kid at 6:30 in the a.m. and you have to assist the kid to using your smartphone or the tab or the laptop. And of course, you also have like a meeting 9 o'clock at office. So it's a big. There are a lot of things to balance at that moment. So that's I would say one challenge. And in terms of the positive side, I think there's another new set of skills also developing. For an instance, the simple thing you tell to an intern, if you're speaking at a boardroom, keep the eye contact. Now it has become like keep the eye contact with the camera, and working, getting things prepared to work on a computer. So I think a lot of skills also, managing yourself, organizing yourself also comes into play. But however, the bigger impact would be for the informal sector. And I think Simrin touched this. Most of them are also in, pretty much caught up for these loan sharks, and they are not in the formal banking sector. So I can see a lot of stress psychological battles that they have been playing would come out, and that will ultimately impact the decision makers probably who are in this audience, because they will have a lot of reportees who will coming with this personal pressure, because they have already gone through like a salary cut. Their husband had gone through a salary cut, but still your tuition master demands like the same fees that your kid, went for tuition. So there's a lot of pressure, and you have to manage that, because ultimately all the pressure will come to you, and you have already given like a salary cut. At the same time, these people will also try to earn their lost income. So they will try to start something while they're working at home. They will try online stuff. They will try to, little things, especially the gig economy. When I had a chat with one of the leaders in the gig economy, what they said was even like the taxi drivers, the delivery guys, now they are not only doing the taxis, they are doing taxis, they are doing deliveries. And if they have like, coconut or king coconut at their backyard, they take it, they put it in the 3-wheeler, and they also try to sell it because they want to cover that lost income. So we'll be becoming like kind of multitasking, especially the gig economy, and we try to earn whatever the lost income, and I think that would be common for everyone. And at the same time, I think the moral issues, people may try to take kickbacks, and the ethicality they may consider to compromise that, and that's a typical HR issue. I'm sure Isuru is the best person to touch that sentiment. But when people cut their income but they have like loan commitments, their vehicle leasing and everything, they may consider if there's an opportunity, they will drift to that direction. So that is something that also we have to consider. I'm talking about the worker category and those who are reporting. And on the other hand, maybe the working from home is a good concept, and I think it's also depending on the industry and the job and the role of your job determines a lot of it, as Sanjeeva very correctly says, because sometimes you are working from home, but your reportees have to be present at the location, and then you have to think from their perspective, and that motivation, empowerment has to do in a different way. So that is something that you have to keep in mind. So overall, in terms of the workforce, there will be a productivity loss definitely, and we are experiencing that. And I think the psychological side is more important. There are new skills are developing. There'll be new skill requirement when we are also working from home. I will give you one example. One of my friends, now she dresses to go to office because her kid requires a lot of attention. So she says to the kid that I'm leaving to the office, but she's coming from the back door and she goes to the room and closes the door and working from home. And she takes the lunch and have the lunch inside that room till 4:30, 5 o'clock. Because otherwise she may, depending, the way that the role of her job requires a lot of focus and attention. So you have to find your own recipe on how productive you would be, and it would be definitely challenging, but there's a good side for it. In terms of, I would also touch the disabled workforce, how this would impact for the disabled workforce. According to some of the numbers that I have seen some time ago, most of the disabled, especially the visually impaired, the hearing impaired, they work at like a worker category. So there will be definite, productivity loss for them, because most of them may not be in a position to do like a work from home situation. They work at like a small garage. I'm looking at the broader picture in terms of numbers. So they may definitely have like a big loss, which that we have to be careful of. And in terms of I think what we initially discussed was also the impact on the state-owned enterprises and how these utilities and everything will come into play. Yes, I think for the moment it's manageable. Luckily, we have some rain, so the power cuts will not be the case. And since there is a drop in the oil prices in the world market, even if we have to move to fossil fuel powered power contribution, I think still we are safe. In terms of the connectivity broadband, yes, there are still issues, but compared to the region and the world, our internet reach and connectivity is somewhat better compared to the region. Of course, I know there are a lot of signal issues and all that. So I think utility side is somewhat managed, but it would be interesting to see how the employers are contributing. As you said, are we paying for the data usage that they consume? Things like that, I think, should come on a more policy angle. So that would be my overall view. How would my overall recommendation would be? It would be a tough time for everyone, including every citizen, from a government perspective, who is someone like a landlord. Every agreement, every contract has come to a point whether to question about the validity, because the businesses are running out of businesses, and so it will be a tough time for everyone. So it's important that we keep peaceful in our mind in terms of making decisions. Of course, there will be opportunities, but it will take a little time to economy to be to pick up, probably about 8 to 12 months. And also how we see the entire world is adapting and embracing this issue. So that would be my overall perspective, Priyanka. It would be a tough time, and we have to face it together and adhere with the working from home situation, and empower our reportees and especially the workforce that we provide the leadership.
Thanks, Dhananath. Dhananath, also, last few months there have been plenty of Zoom forums, right? So one of the numbers that was thrown out from an export perspective was Sri Lanka was looking at, I think it was EDB, who said our original target for this year was $18 billion. And they're looking at, almost that's coming down to about $11 to $12 billion. So that's just exports, right? So the economic activity to a great extent has come to a grinding halt. At this point in time, are you able to share a little bit more specific in terms of the economic impact to the country? Any estimates, any guesstimates, any view on that? Like in terms of specific numbers, how the year might progress?
Yeah, the basic estimate is, Priyanka, the economy will contract from about 1% to 3%. So our growth was about 2.3% 2019. So what we expect is to about a contraction of the entire economy from 1% to 3%. So that's the overall picture. In terms of industries, yes, exports, the tourism, of course, as we all know, we have to probably write it off for this year. It's very difficult to expect the tourism numbers, and the impact when you have the impact on the tourism, it will filter it down to most of these hotels and the workforce there and the entire supply chain. So there will be like a big knockdown effect in terms of the tourism sector, and also in terms of the apparel sector. It depends on the brands. You are pretty much aware of this situation, because there will be like a demand drop from the customer's point of view overseas. It depends on the brands. Some of the high-end brands may be working it fine, but when there's a demand drop, of course there will be supplies drop from Sri Lankan manufacturing point of view. In terms of rubber and tea, which are the other two industries, tea is, I think, picking up because, of course, there are people are staying at home, and I'm sure they want all, there's sentiments that tea is better for COVID and all that. So tea is picking up. That's the positive side. Rubber is also somewhat positive because of this deep products and all that. But overall, I would say I will keep it at about 1 to 3% contraction. In terms of unemployment, there were about 90,000 job losses when the 2008 economic crisis hit us. So this is more severe than that, and it's about after 12 years. So my expectation is probably about 200,000 job losses will be taking place. And it will depend on, in 2008, it was mainly the Europe and the American region, but now it has gone to the Middle East. So most of our labor force also somewhat in Middle East. So if they lose their jobs, they might have to come back, and there will be a lot of unemployment created here. And also at the same time, our remittances will be dropped. That will add pressure on the currency, and it will be like a big knockdown effect. So I estimated about 200,000 job losses, and about 1.3% economic contraction would be the overall picture.
Thanks, Dhananath. I'll just sort of open it up to all the panelists. The next question was something that came from Dhananath's conversation. Isuru, Simran, Sanjeeva, any one of you. A lot of people are very happy about working from home. But in the longer term, when this model is figured out, Isuru, also there'll be, is there any, because I've heard this in multiple forums, from employers' perspective, I think pay scales, there's a strong chance will also be adjusted for the longer term. If you're working from home versus probably working at office. Is there any kind of direction on that? Is that something that's fair to comment, or would pay scales be the same? Because based on what you said earlier, we need to sort of revisit our value contribution. So in that, it's pay for performance, but at the same time, a lot of elements are considered in. Any thoughts on that, Isuru, Sanjeeva? Anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, Priyanka, I think, when you look at a job of work, transitioning from an on-premise to a remote working condition, the job of work and the quantum of work generally would have to be the same, right? So your basic contribution, your basic pay shouldn't ideally change unless the interconnectivity of the different roles and the total entire outcome of what we produce as a team changes because of a different business model, and that is an entirely different discussion. But if you look what might change, it would be your allowances. So, for example, you have your car allowances, travel allowances, etc., which is obviously tied to a specific activity. So, whilst you may say, at a senior level, if you're given a car loan, whether you come to office 5 days a week or 2 days a week, you might still need your vehicle. But if you look at a reduced situation, we might, going forward, have maybe an Uber or a pick-me situation where you might say, look, you know what, this job doesn't entail so much of travel, but we will reimburse you on actuals. Or we might look at a travel allowance and say, look, you are getting, say, 20,000 rupees for as travel, but since you're only doing it 2 days a week, we might reduce the fuel component of it, proportionally. So I think the allowances will change, but you'll have to also maybe offset certain personal costs that you may have to incur, like data connectivity. I don't even know AC at home. I don't know what might come into it. Finally, there'll be certain demands for if it's a longer term solution, right? So these will have to be set off. You will have to look at it holistically. But I think the basic pay for the basic job and the job of work ideally should not change. If at all, it will change with market dynamics, whether you're working remotely or working on premise. But it's the ancillary and the peripheral allowances, etc., that might take an impact.
Simran, any quick thoughts on that before I move on to Sanjeev?
Definitely. The ILO is a standard-setting organization, and when we actually started to think about teleworking back in the yesteryears, we're about 100 years old, but it was actually born out of the wage fixation convention that we passed. So it's very issue of wages is center stage, and wages and benefits, right? And then you had the Home Workers Convention, but three principles that must be adhered to when you're thinking of teleworking by international labor standards that have been agreed to between workers, employers, and governments. This is very, very important. One is equality of remuneration. Just because you've shifted the location, if the work is the same, certainly you must be getting paid the same. So you shouldn't use this as an excuse to slash wages that have been agreed. And then similarly, you should also have the same access to rights and benefits that you would had you been sitting at a workplace, because you're still an employee, right? And then finally, and this is really important in the context of COVID going forward, because of the health dimensions and the superior vulnerabilities, many people that don't have health insurance, because Sri Lanka has a fairly decent health system, but look at these other countries where they haven't had, it's been a breakdown. So the social security system is really important as well to make sure that employees continue to benefit from that social security, which also has the health side of it in terms of health protection. Unfortunately, a lot of people are not under the social security umbrella in Sri Lanka, and that's a bit of a worry. But yeah, equality of remuneration, which is the wages, benefits should be the same, and social security are extremely essential. One last point on this is that workplaces, I understand what Isuru is saying, allowances might go away, but unfortunately we see in many countries and in some sectors that the wage model is also not a fair one that was there pre-COVID, in the sense that the allowances basically had to make up for the fact that the wages were set unrealistically low. So I think we have to be really careful treading on this and coming up with some sort of blanket, now no allowances, no. Everyone knows that we're struggling, everyone, employers as well as employees, and we're all in it together. Everyone will need to make sacrifices, but you need to have a forum to have that discussion so that it's not just something dictated and tomorrow a worker finds out that I'm not getting a paycheck or my social security is not, the employer's not going to contribute as they should, whatever it might be. So this issue of dialogue is extremely important, what we call social dialogue, in making any changes to these basic principles that must be adhered to by international labor standards.
Absolutely.
So that's my piece.
Thank you so much, and that's very insightful. Sanjeev, anything to add to that? And prior to that, let me just put another spin on that same conversation. That is, from a labor standard perspective, and there's a question on our Q&A as well about labor laws. We'll come to it subsequently. But what if the market dynamics take over? Now, take for instance, for the same job, the quantum of job that Isuru and Simran talks about. What if in the future, it comes to the gig economy sort of thing? Now, people are used to getting things done remotely, right? So the market, the demand and supply might sort of drive down because the value that's been placed before. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so interesting. So, like Isuru mentioned, there's an upside and a downside. Allowances, yes, if you take traveling, but on the other side, if this continues or if there is a transformation in the way we work, there is also some other allowances that the employees might start to demand, right? I don't want to go into detail, but that's a possibility. But right now we are like Simran said, we're going through a contraction in terms of all economic activities. So we are all in it together. So we probably need to ride this wave and see where it's going to take us. At the same time, I think some of the panelists also touched on that there's a workforce that's getting overtaxed. There's a workforce that's really working more than what's required, but there's also a portion of a workforce that's been actually we are not utilizing their full potential when you work from home or when you work remotely. So how do you balance this off? And one thing that I've always tried to grapple with this is when you bring in the gig economy, if you can identify work based on output, how do you identify whether a person has so many hours of work, and is our labor law or are our organizations ready to allow these employees to go out and do another job? It could be, example, I'm just throwing up a very, it may sound a little archaic, but on your way home, can you open your Uber app and work as a Uber or a pick me drive on the way home, right? If your work hours don't really require you to work more than 8 hours, could you also do another job in terms of offering your services for a separate pay? So as much as you're also going to take a pay cut and work for the limited hours of work that you're doing, can you also go and work and take on more work hours from an outside party? So these are still debates, I think, that will require a lot of understanding. Even I've actually posed these questions even at one of the forums at the AmCham to the Labour Department. But I think these sort of questions will need to be thought through and now, especially now, come up with some policies at organization level and as a country in facilitating these. Because at the end of the day, if people lose their buying power, that has a multiply effect on the economy overall. And coming Absolutely. Out of that is going to take that's going to be even more detrimental, and it's only going to prolong the recovery of the world economy and the economy of our own country.
So, Isuru, I'll sort of throw this question at you, not in your capacity of the Chief People's Officer at John Keel's, but in general. Now, if you take the very factor that Sanjeeva brought out, because what this whole work from home allows is, on one side, we're talking about outcome versus effort, right? So as long as we deliver the outcome, what if employees decide to look at various other things? Because historically, all our employment contracts, all the companies, specifically states that you can only generate revenue out of the job that we give you. I mean, I'm not very familiar with the term, but that's the essential means behind it. It's written. It's part of the employment contract that when you give you a full-time job, you can't do anything else, right? But given what people have experienced and given the new opportunities people have, and all of a sudden, I mean, it was there for the longest time, but people can be part of the Fivers of this world or wherever, where they can actually go out and do something and earn something extra. I'm not asking for official view because that's not the right thing to do, but probably we as companies, we might really be open to some of these things, right, going forward in the future?
Yes, Priyanka, I think, I again, speaking on behalf of many organizations out there, I think we've had these clauses in our employment contract, which says that it's exclusive contract. But having said that, there are some outs there, which means that, with the special approval, you can do certain things as long as there is no conflict with the job. As well as if there is no conflict in time of delivering your job, then you can do it like, lecturing. A lot of people do, things like that. But I think what we are speaking of is going way beyond that. And if we are to be progressive in our recruitment, in our talent acquisition, in our retention, we need to look at it. We need to be able to go out there and say, look, as long as you deliver this to me, whether you do it in 8 hours or 4 hours or 3 hours, it's not a problem. But as long as there is no conflicting interest, I think that is the important part there. You should be able to go and do something else. And I think gig workers, the younger folk who are coming in, are going to want to, and you know, this thing about millennials and Gen Zs not being able to stay in one place for 2 years or longer, but is really what it is, because they are looking for experiences. And this era of loyalty and having, you know, 10, 15, 20 year terms in one company is now really fading away, and that's reality. So if we are to motivate and retain the younger generations coming into the workforce, we have to change as organization. There is no doubt about it. We have to be more flexible, and we need to allow for that. But, you know, in certain parameters, like I said, you know, conflict of interest, and I think that's fair. But we need to change our ways. And I think that goes for many organizations, and, you know, and I'm not speaking on behalf of JKH here per se,
Absolutely.
But I think generally we need to take a much more flexible view.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, we've kind of answered a few questions that was popped up. There was a specific question from one gent. Let me just go into it. We more or less touched it, but want to be very specific on this. So again, Giridhar is asking, do the current labor laws permit rewarding results and punish underperformers? Anyone who'd like to take that on from a very technical perspective? Yes, Simran. Isru, go ahead, please. Go ahead, Isru.
I wouldn't use the word punish. I would probably say development. From an organizational perspective, you know, you reward the performers and you try to develop the underperformers, right? And if they are unsuitable for the position, the first thing that you do is, you know, sometimes you have a round peg in a square hole whether we can redistribute, redeploy. I think there are lots of other methods of trying to make, you know, everybody is not perfect for any job. So those are the first avenues. From a legal perspective, it's a long process. If the question they're asking is, can we, you know, let someone go because of underperformance? It's a long road. You know, it has been done. It can be done. You have to, you know, sort of build up a case for a long period. I mean, those are all processes that's there. But it's not the avenue that the employee would take as a first resort. It would be probably the last. I think we need to redeploy and try to train them because finally we hired them, right? And we are responsible for them being there in the first place. We need to look at all avenues.
Thank you so much, Isru. Anyone who'd like to share their parting remarks? I think we've naturally come to an end to this discussion. So it kind of opened up broader horizons on different platforms. But just to recap some of the key elements. So Simran, thank you very much for bringing that perspective in terms of how this is having an impact on both the organized and the unorganized sector. At the same time, voicing those concerns in terms of in the longer term, from a work from home perspective, what about that sector who's boarded? Essentially, you talked about Maldives, even in Colombo, a lot of employees are actually boarded. They're boarded in probably not the most conducive social distancing environment. So how do we deal with that? Great that you all are generating a conversation on that. Then Isru, from your perspective, thank you very much for all those insights. One of the key takeaways for me was how we really sort of re-look at this whole work from home. I think it was quite obvious from everyone. We are kind of, we've reacted for the first 2 months. Now we are kind of responding to the real need from work from home. Isru, so vividly you explained that. Thank you so much for that. Then Sanjeeva, you kind of brought that entire broad perspective. I think you being at AmCham and having those stats, thank you so much for sharing those, because that was pretty much putting things into perspective in terms of how this is going to have impact across the board for various categories. And Dhananath, from your end, thank you very much for that broader perspective, because you bring in that research and development perspective into this conversation. And in terms of, it's frightening, but I think people in this audience would appreciate those numbers that you shared in terms of economic contraction. Again, not based on anything specific. That was a guesstimate you've made. I think we're all gearing up for that sort of economic contraction. So overall, panel, thank you so much for taking part. And for the audience, thank you very much for being with us both on Zoom and on various other social media of AmCham Sri Lanka. Truly appreciate your views and comments that you've shared. So until we come across again for another session, AmCham session. So it's goodbye from all of us. From this end, Rai, over to you.
Thank you.
And thanks again, as Priyanka so eloquently put it, to every single one of our panelists. You've really sort of broadened horizons and opened up our eyes to a lot of things that we may have been sort of mulling over in the back of our minds, but not really put into perspective. And I think this session, we've actually gone almost half an hour over our planned time, despite which we have over 80% of our participants are still online with us. In fact, a few minutes ago, approximately half an hour ago, Priyanka asked me, are we at time? And I said, yes, but everybody's still on. So let's continue, because obviously this is a conversation that's very, very immediately impactful and relevant, and something that's very necessary for us, both in terms of business leaders and as employees as well, as we try to sort of navigate our way through this and into the more long-term, into sustained recovery and into proceeding forward, and not letting ourselves get sort of pulled down by external situations. Something that was touched on last week as well, when Mr. Sanjeev Jha mentioned, he was talking about the Phoenix from Harry Potter during his conversation, and that's quite literally what we need to be doing, and what I think, especially as Sri Lankans, this is my personal view. As Sri Lankans, we've been through pretty much the mill if you look at contemporary history, and there's not much that can keep us down. And I hope that it remains the same of us coming through this pandemic situation as well, that we continue to be positive, that we continue to take things in a pragmatic view, and rather than dwell on the, oh my gosh, and why has this happened, but to continue to move forward, changing, adapting, and innovating to as much as possible a sustained and sustainable recovery going forward. So that's our session for today. Don't forget to join us next week. Next week, we'll be talking about financing recovery, and again, looking at it in a very sustainable way. And we hope to have a very interesting panel on board for that. As usual, keep an eye on the bulletin board on Monday, and we'll be sharing details on that for you. To those of you who may have missed any of our previous sessions, a couple of questions came up on the panel today. One was regarding labor laws. And as the panel, Isru and Priyanka both took that question regarding reward versus, the word used was punishment, but reward versus, corrective measures. I think that was very, very deeply, there was a deep dive cover of that. We seem to be doing a lot of deep dives here. There was a deep dive cover on the labor conundrum a couple of weeks ago, and that the recording of that session is available on our YouTube channel. I would recommend that you go and take a look there. There's also a document related there, and the link to that is also there, which takes a very in-depth look at all the current labor laws prevalent in Sri Lanka, in terms of pay cuts, in terms of furloughs, in terms of rewards, in terms of what can and can't be done under the prevalent labor laws. There's also a subsequent document that was shared by us, by AmCham, done by the same analyst, Mr. Rohan Dunavila, with regard to the agreement, the tripartite agreement that had been reached between the government, the EFC, and various trade unions, and the legality and the applicability of that under the current labor laws. So that will also be an interesting read if you want to read for both us as employees, stay at home, and the workers, as well as from the business leaders' perspective. So there's another set of resources there that you can take a look at. So the AmCham YouTube channel is AmCham Sri Lanka. Not hard to forget. Just do go there and take a look. That'll answer a few of those questions that we weren't able to get through, or that need a different perspective. So you will be able to get your answers there. So once again, from the AmCham team, it's our usual adage to reminding you to stay home, stay safe, and stay healthy. And thank you once again, each and every one of our panelists. Thank you to each of us joining us on Zoom as well as on Facebook Live. and who will continue to watch this video and continue to share this video as you learn more from it. Wishing you all a wonderful evening and a blessed weekend ahead. This is me signing out from AmCham, and to all of our panelists, you're all on screen, so you can do your wave and say goodbye as well. Bye-bye and good night.